Today we're going to be making this fun and simple beanie as part of our 4 skein challenge. So if you're interested in the other beanies in this series, check the links in the description. And for this, I am going to be working with some size 4 medium weight wool yarn by the Cascade yarns, and the colors are copper and sky. I'm also going to be using a size H or 8 or 5mm crochet hook, and you're also going to need a safety pin or stitch marker for this. And we're going to begin by attaching the yarn to our crochet hook using a slip knot, and we're going to chain 21. And if you're unfamiliar with any of the stitches used in this pattern, check the links in the description for my stitch tutorial videos. And once you have your 21 chains, then what we're going to do is we're going to skip this first chain as a turning chain, and then we're going to place 1/2 double crochet slip stitch in the back loop only of our remaining stitches. So to do that, yarn over and insert your crochet hook in that back loop only, and then yarn over and drop all the loops on your crochet hook for a 1/2 double crochet slip stitch. And we're just going to repeat this process going down our row for a total of 20 1/2 double crochet slip stitches. And at the end of your row, you're going to chain 1 and turn your work. And the pattern for this row is to skip that turning chain, and then we're going to place 1/2 double crochet slip stitch in the back loop only of each stitch going down our row again. So again, at the end of this row, we should have a total of 20 1/2 double crochet slip stitches. And again, at the end of your row, you're going to chain 1 and turn your work. And the pattern from here is just to repeat that last row over and over to build the body of the brim of your beanie. And I went ahead and crocheted this brim to roughly 18 inches, but of course you can make this as long as you would like. Once you've gotten your brim to your desired length, go ahead and fold it in half and make sure your crochet hook is on the opposite side of your starting tail here. And from here, we are going to join our short edges together by placing slip stitches. So make sure you've placed a chain 1 at the end of your last row, and then we're going to slide our crochet hook up underneath the last stitch. And then from this first row, we want to insert our crochet hook in that corresponding last loop. And from here, we're going to yarn over and drop all of the loops on our crochet hook for a slip stitch. And we just want to repeat this process, working up the short edge of our brim, joining these 2 edges together. And once you're done joining your short edges, it should look something like this. So from here, I want you to fold your brim up lengthwise to hide this seam. And you're going to need 1 safety pin for this project, but if you have extras, go ahead and grab them. And if you don't, you can use stitch markers or scrap pieces of yarn. From here, go ahead and remove your crochet hook from your brim, and we're going to secure this loop with a safety pin. And if you pull on your working yarn, that will tighten the loop, and you can always pull your safety pin back out to re-access your loop. And this just prevents us from having to cut and tie off our yarn every time we want to change colors. From here, we're going to divide our brim into 4 equal parts using our safety pins, stitch markers, or scrap pieces of yarn. Next, we're going to attach our next color to our crochet hook using a slip knot. And since we don't have traditional stitches to work in, we're going to have to work in the available loops on both sides of our brim for this next row. So we're going to start by inserting our crochet hook somewhere near our starting tail right here. And we're just going to work in the available loops on both sides of our brim, like I said. And we're just going to yarn over and pull through all the loops on our crochet hook for a slip stitch. And then we're going to chain 2. And for this row, we're going to place 40 bead stitches going around our row. So that means we need to place 10 in each of our 4 sections. So to place this first bead stitch, we need to insert our crochet hook in some loops behind our chain 2. And we want to yarn over before we do this. So go ahead and yarn over and then insert your crochet hook in 2 loops that are sort of behind your chain 2. And we're going to yarn over and pull up 3 times. So that means we're going to yarn over and reinsert our crochet hook in those loops and yarn over and pull up through. And we want to do that one more time so that we have a total of 3 yarn overs and pull up throughs. From here, we're just going to yarn over and drop all of those loops and then place a chain 1 to complete our bead stitch. So that's the first bead stitch of this row. So for the remaining bead stitches in this row, we need to place a double crochet, and you need to make sure you leave room for your bead stitch behind it. So I'm going to place my double crochet in these 2 loops here. And then working backwards, we need to place our bead stitch between our first bead and this double crochet. And again, that's just going to be 3 yarn over and pull up through, working in both loops of your brim. Once you have your 3 yarn over and pull up through, then you can yarn over and drop all the loops on your crochet hook, and then don't forget to chain 1 to complete your bead. And if you find that your bead stitch is a little tight, just try to keep your yarn over and pull up throughs nice and loose. And we're going to repeat this pattern until we have a total of 40 bead stitches in our row. And once you have your 40 bead stitches, your beanie should look something like this. So we're going to join our first and last bead by placing a slip stitch in the top of our first bead stitch. And then we want to trade out our crochet hook and our safety pin. And before we begin our next row, I like to hide my tails in the gap between my 2 sides of my brim right here. So I'm just literally pulling my tails between those 2 layers. And we're going to chain 2, and then we're going to place a slip stitch back in this very same stitch where we've already placed a slip stitch with our previous color. And before we continue on with our row, we want to make sure we haven't accidentally trapped our working yarn or our little loop. Then we're going to chain 2. And this chain 2 is going to count as our first double crochet. And the pattern for this row is going to be to place 2 double crochets at the top of each of our bead stitches. And so as you can see here, each of our bead stitches has 3 stitches. So we will be skipping a stitch in every bead, and I find it's easiest to just be consistent with the stitches that I'm working in. So I'm going to be working in the last 2 stitches of each of my beads like this. Of course, you can work in any 2 stitches that you would like. But either way, you want to try to place 2 double crochets at the top of each of your bead stitches. So you should have a total of 80 double crochets when you're done. And when you get to the end of your row, your pattern should look something like this. And we're going to skip our chain 2 and then place a slip stitch in the top of our first double crochet. And the pattern for our next row is to place 1 back post stitch in each stitch in our row. So to do that, we're going to yarn over and we're going to insert our crochet hook in the gap between our chain 2 and our first double crochet. And we want to do this from behind. Then we're going to insert our crochet hook between our first and second double crochet. So you can see here that we have captured our first double crochet in our crochet hook. From here, we're going to yarn over and pull up through the post, and then yarn over and drop 2 loops at a time until we complete our stitch. So to repeat that pattern around your row, you're going to yarn over and capture that second double crochet in your crochet hook, and then yarn over and pull up through your double crochet, and then yarn over and drop 2 loops at a time. And you'll notice that these subsequent back post stitches are a lot easier to place. So go ahead and repeat this pattern going all the way around your row, and I'll meet back up with you at the end of the row. And when you get to the end of your row, I want you to work around your chain 2 just like you've been doing your double crochets. And that will be the last stitch of our row. From here, we're going to place a slip stitch in the top of our first back post stitch. Then we're going to trade out our crochet hook and our safety pin again. And for our next row, we're going to begin by placing a chain 2, and then we want to slip stitch back into this same stitch where we've already placed a slip stitch in the top of that first back post stitch. And we're going to begin our next row with a chain 2, and then we want to work backwards to place our first bead stitch, but it's important that we don't accidentally work in our tiny little slip stitch, but instead we want to work in our last back post stitch here. And we're going to place our bead stitches the exact same way we did before, yarning over and pulling up through 3 times. And don't forget to place your chain 1 after your bead stitch to complete it. And so for our subsequent bead stitches, we're going to skip our next stitch and then place a double crochet in the following stitch. Then we want to place our bead stitch in that skipped stitch. So from here, we're just going to repeat that pattern going all the way around our row, placing our bead stitches. And we should have a total of 40 bead stitches when we're done. And at the end of your row, you're going to slip stitch into the top of your first bead stitch. And from here, we're going to trade out our crochet hook and safety pin and just repeat our last 3 rows over and over to build the body of our beanie. And you're just going to place a chain 2 to bring your working yarn up to your current row, and make sure you place your slip stitch in the same stitch where you placed your slip stitch from your previous color. So go ahead and build the body of your beanie. And I followed this pattern until I had a total of 5 rows of my bead stitch and 4 rows of those double crochet and then back post stitch rows. So from here, we're going to begin to decrease. So we're going to start with a chain 2 and a slip stitch in the top of that first bead stitch, just like we've been doing. So from here, we're going to chain 2 and place our first 3 stitches like normal. And don't forget that chain 2 does count as your first double crochet. So once you have your first 3 double crochets in place, then we're going to double crochet together our next 2 stitches. And this is going to be a little bit weird for this pattern. So go ahead and yarn over and insert your crochet hook in your next stitch and yarn over and pull up through. So you should have 3 loops on your crochet hook. We're going to yarn over and insert our crochet hook in our next stitch and yarn over and pull up through. And you should have 5 loops on your crochet hook. From here, we're going to yarn over and drop 3 loops and then yarn over and drop 3 loops again. So that's going to be our pattern going all the way around our row, placing our first 3 double crochets like normal, and then double crocheting together our 4th and our 5th stitch. And you're just going to place your 2 double crochets at the top of each bead stitch, just like you've been doing. And you should have a total of 64 double crochets at the end of your row. And at the end of your row, you're going to skip your chain 2 and place a slip stitch in the top of your first double crochet. And for this row, we're going to place our first 2 back post stitches just like normal. And then we're going to crochet 2 stitches together. So once you have your first 2 back post stitches, then I want you to yarn over and insert your crochet hook around your next double crochet and yarn over and pull up through it, and then yarn over and drop 2 loops. So you should have 2 loops on your crochet hook, and we're going to yarn over and insert our crochet hook around our next double crochet and yarn over and pull up through. Then we're just going to yarn over and drop 2 loops and then yarn over and drop 3 loops. So I'll show you that one more time. Go ahead and place your next 2 back post stitches like normal. And then we're going to yarn over and insert our crochet hook around our next double crochet, yarning over and pulling up through. Then we're going to yarn over and drop 2 loops and then yarn over and work around our next double crochet, yarning over and pulling up through. Then we're going to yarn over and drop 2 loops and then yarn over and drop our last 3 loops. Go ahead and repeat that going around your row, and I will meet back up with you at the end of the row. And you should have a total of 48 back post stitches at the end of your row. At the end of your row, you're going to place a slip stitch in the top of your first back post stitch, and then trade out your crochet hook and your safety pin. And just like all the other rows, we're going to chain 2 and then place a slip stitch back in that same stitch, that first back post stitch. And we're going to chain 2. And these decreasing bead stitches are going to be a little different than before. So rather than working in our last back post stitch, we want to skip that stitch and work in the back post stitch before it. So 2 back. And that's where we're going to place our bead stitch. And then for the remaining bead stitches in our row, we want to skip 2 stitches rather than 1, and then place our double crochet in this 3rd stitch. And then working backwards in our first skipped stitch, we want to place our bead stitch. And so that's how you're going to place the remaining bead stitches in your row, skipping 2 stitches rather than 1. So go ahead and repeat this going around your row, and when you get to the end of your row, you should have a total of 16 bead stitches. And when you get to the end of your row, you're just going to slip stitch into the top of your first bead stitch. And from here, we are going to cut and tie off our yarn. And we're going to place our crochet hook in that previous color. And we're going to chain 2 and then place a slip stitch in the top of our first bead stitch. And we do have the option of crocheting over our tail if we would like to. From here, we're going to chain 2, and then we're just going to place those decreasing double crochet stitches going all the way around our row. And we're still going to be placing 2 double crochets at the top of each of our bead stitches, just like we were doing before. So go ahead and repeat this going around your row, and when you get to the end of your row, you should have a total of 17 double crochets. And in this last stitch of our last bead stitch, we want to double crochet together our first and second bead, the same way we've been doing it. And from here, we're just going to place a slip stitch in the top of our first double crochet, just like we've been doing. And we're just going to place those decreasing back post stitches going all the way around our row for a total of 9 back post stitches. And when it comes to placing that last decreasing post stitch, you're going to work around your first post like normal, and then I want you to combine your chain 2 and your last decreasing double crochet in that second joining here. And from here, we're going to place a slip stitch in the top of our first back post stitch. And I want you to cut and tie off your yarn, but I want you to leave a tail of about 6 inches. And next, I am just going to weave my tail in and out of my last row of stitches so I can cinch up this little hole at the top. And once you're done weaving your tail, you can give it a nice pull to cinch up the top. And from here, we just want to tie off our yarn using available loops near our tail. And now I'm going to draw my tail to the inside of my beanie. And this tail will make a great anchor for a pom-pom, so I will link to my yarn and faux fur pom-pom tutorials in the description for you. Otherwise, you can hide this tail along the inside of your beanie. Thank you so much for working with me, and I hope you have a wonderful, awesome day.